So we move forward back to UK, Somerset. But before we start with Becky, where are you, Becky? No, I don't see it. Let me see if I can see Becky here. A second. Okay, I'm gonna wait for Becky, but in the meantime, maybe Volker, can you comment on this case?
Yes, this is an interesting case because it's covering about 5 years of BVD control in the dairy farm, and it nicely describes what can go wrong and how difficult it sometimes is to really remove this virus from a herd, and it is very well described, I think, and it really highlights that BVD control is not always simple. It is straightforward, yes, but it has its pitfalls, and that is very nicely described in this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm looking at again Becky's connection. Probably she's trying to connect. I will see. Okay, let's wait for another 5 to 10 seconds, and I will ask maybe my colleague Matt would give us a brief summary of the case, if that's okay. So let's wait for 10 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to invite Matt here. Hi, Matt.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect, and we see you.
Good stuff.
Yeah. So
promoted to panelist.
Yeah. So Becky couldn't, I think, keep the internet connection stable, probably. So, shall we continue with you?
Okay. Yeah. Yep. No, happy to. And if Becky joins in, happy to hand back over to her. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Matt. So maybe you introduce Becky.
Yeah, good. Somerset born and bred. Qualified from London Vet School in 2010, and yeah, I believe she's headed back to the practice that she's at the moment and has stayed there, which is at Axe Valley Vets, and yeah, managed to marry into farming stock, so she can't escape now. So this is Becky here as well. Next slide.
Yeah.
We've just had an internet crash. Sorry, we're trying to run it off the mobile phone.
You might want to start again. I've just savaged your presentation, Becky.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think yeah, Matt introduced you very nicely, Becky, and the farm. So I would suggest that you continue from this slide maybe quickly, and then we get the story.
Can you hear me okay still?
Yes.
Yeah. So New Grove Farm is a 200 Holstein milking herd, milking 3 times a day, all year round. It was perceived to be a closed herd, although officially it is actually an open herd following some further interrogation of the farmer. Average lactation is 12,000 litres a year, And we came about wanting to investigate BVD on this farm due to the son keen to investigate his status following increased exposure in the farming press regarding BVD. We started with tissue antigen ELISA testing, tagging and testing the calves, and any positive animals that were tag and test positive were then subjected to blood PCR antigen test to confirm their PEI status. Next slide, please. So it all kicked off in January 2017. At that current time, I wasn't actually the routine vet on the farm. It was a previous colleague. And it was decided that that dam probably hadn't been fully protected with the vaccination before the service, rather than a vaccination breakdown. So we sort of ruled that one out a little bit. So Rose was sort of put to one side, and we weren't too concerned with her. Then during April and May, 2 more heifers calved. Their calves, Daisy, who is a red heifer, which is important for a bit later on, and Tulip was tag and test inconclusive. The advice was given to retest these animals at a later date. And at that point, it was again questioned whether these heifers had actually been given their vaccine more than a month before they went to the bull. And with disease known to be circulating on the farm, having had that positive tag and test Rose back in January, it was decided that if the vaccination protocol wasn't fully implemented, then it was likely that this is where these animals had been infected. So it all sort of started going a bit further downhill when in June 2017, Annabelle and Cora were both tag and test positive and blood antigen positive. Their dams were negative, which was one good thing. And we then had a further tag and test positive in November, Emily. This was really, really frustrating at this point because we really felt that the vaccination protocol was really well in place. Everything had been vaccinated well before service. Emily's mother was negative, and the bulk milk PCR remained negative at this point. So despite this vaccination protocol in place, we still couldn't work out why we're getting all these PIs. On further interrogation again of the farmer, it turned out that he'd brought in a bunch of heifers, and some of them were tag and tested before they entered the farm, and some were antibody tested at the vendor's farm, and they were all presumed to be vaccinated, but he wasn't exactly sure. And he decided that maybe they weren't all fully vaccinated. We decided at that point, so the end of 2017, to do a young stock antibody screen to see whether there was any more antibodies floating around. And actually, this wasn't actually done, which was a bit frustrating because we thought we'd cracked it in 2017. But in April 18, it all really got quite difficult to manage. So Maddie was tag and test positive in April 18, and her dam, Julia, had been vaccinated twice, so we knew there had to be something odd going on here. The dam was tag and test negative. She was one of the first heifers that we had on the tag and testing scheme. So we decided to blood test her, as we wanted to rule out that the dam definitely wasn't a PI, and it actually came back as positive at this point. The animal, so Julia was a false negative as a calf, and we spoke to NML, who we'd done the tag and testing through, and we questioned the sensitivity of the tag and testing, and yes, we were right, she was a false negative. We then repeated the tag and test on Julia, just for interest's sake really, and at this point she did come back positive on the tag and test. We really thought that this was going to be case closed. However, it then deteriorated when in June, not only did the bulk milk PCR turn positive, but we also had Wendy, a calf born, who was tag and test and blood antigen positive. Her mother, Alison, was negative. So we didn't know why the bulk milk had gone positive at this point. We went onto the farm, we discussed what happened recently. There had been some tag and tests that had been sent off in the post, but we were still waiting for the results to come back from there. And there had also been 3 other dead calves on the farm that hadn't been tested, so we decided to check the mothers of those calves. Luckily, they all came back as negative. So at that moment in time, we decided that it could have been transient BVD infection that was turning the bulk milk PCR positive. A little bit later on that year, Daisy, the red heifer, which we had previously talked about in my little flow diagram, she was presented at a TB test for being a poor heifer. If we could nip to the next slide, please. And this is Daisy herself. So we tested her for Johne's disease and BVD. She turned out to be BVD positive. She had been an inconclusive tag and test originally, but had never been retested. So finally she was culled. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So at that point, because she had been inconclusive, and I was worried that we might have missed some other inconclusives, we thought we'd go back through the tag and testing data. And lo and behold, Tulip, which was also an inconclusive, was still in the herd. And she was retested at this point and was blood antigen positive. And Rose, who was a positive on a tag and test right back at the start, was still in the herd. So we culled both of these two out. We still had this positive bulk milk, so we thought it could be the transient infection. But sadly, when we did another PCR, quarterly bulk milk PCR in October, we still had a positive bulk milk sample. To find the PI animal in the milking herd, we split the group down to 20 groups of 10 animals, and the positive group was then subjected to individual blood ELISA antigen testing. And finally, we found our one missing PI. She was Mary, number 748. She was calving in at almost 4 years old. So she had missed the tag and testing originally that we'd been doing on the farm because she was a PI. She'd taken a lot longer to get in calf. And her calf also came back as tag and test positive. These animals were culled from the herd, and the bulk milk PCR quarterly has remained negative ever since. And there's been no positive tag and tests since October 2018. Next slide, please. So the whole herd vaccination was implemented on farm in 2016. Since then, any tag and test positive animal is always blood PCR antigen tested, and then they're culled from the herd. Strict biosecurity is in place for incoming stock to be isolated and tested. We have also advised to do the annual young stock screens just to rule out any false negatives that might slip through the net with the tag and testing. Visually, we haven't got any data to measure the conception rate back from 2016, but I would say the conception rate has definitely improved, and the number of pneumonia cases we're having on farm has also definitely dropped, which is brilliant. The lesson that I learned, if we could move to the next slide, BVD is definitely a challenge, and it's important to question again everything that you're told by the farmer, because taking that full detailed history alongside looking at historical data was the only way that we got to the bottom of this one. And I'd just like to say thank you to Boehringer, specifically Elsa Milnes, for helping with the interrogation of the farmer and finding those potential little loopholes and getting to the bottom of it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Becky. It was interesting. And before you started, actually, Volker made some comments about your case. Volker, would you be so kind to rephrase those points to Becky, because she didn't hear you?
Yes, I was saying that this is a case which highlights the practical difficulties in BVD control, and that it illustrates the pitfalls in BVD control. And it became very clear that small details play a role, and that it has to be done very thoroughly. And Becky said, sometimes it's frustrating. That's right. That's in many cases it is frustrating, but finally you managed. And may I have one question to you?
Yes.
We talked in our previous presentation about the use of antibiotics, and apparently your herd is now healthier.
Yes.
Could you notice any reduction of antibiotic use in that herd, because that's a strong argument for BVD control, of course.
Yes, I haven't gone back through the data, but it's something certainly that we could do.
Because politically, it's a very important thing. If you can convince people that BVD control has the additional advantage of reducing the antibiotics, that's a very strong argument.
Definitely.
Thank you for care. One comment from my side. I think, Becky, you took the lead in the middle of the case, I think, time-wise. So it's, I think, also important to manage all these stakeholders and the relationship between the farms and the vets. So yeah, I appreciate your efforts here. So I see Matt, since you're here, do you have any comments, Matt, from your side, or any questions?
Presume this wasn't your now husband's farm.
No. But we have had BVD at home as well.
But no, I think it is just obviously something that, that my colleague Elsa was working with you on, and just the extent of that timeline of investigations. What was the impact on your relationship with the farmer through this? When you were, you think you've got a result, you think you can explain it, and then something else happens and something else happens for such a long period of time. What was the impact on your relationship with the farmer?
It was very tricky to start with, as the clinical director of the business was retiring. So I was taking on the routine, and I was taking a bigger role on their farm anyway. I'm finding that dealing with the next generation of farmers is very different than dealing with the older generation of farmers, certainly in our area at the minute. And I think the younger generation demand more, which can only be a good thing, but it could have put quite a lot of pressure on our relationship. It was only really when I had Elsa there to help with the questioning that we got anywhere. And then I felt that he was trying to put a lot of blame onto us, that the vaccination wasn't working, but it was when you question them back and got the answers. But then subsequently, he's been really impressed that we found the problem and that we grilled through it all. So I would say we've definitely got a much stronger relationship now than we started off with. But I could also see how you could fall out with somebody quite early on over something if they weren't willing to participate with the questioning and the history taking, etc.
Yeah, that's a good point. And from some investigations I've been involved in, that openness of the farmer is vital. And it is such a tricky disease to get to the bottom of. If you've got somebody that's not open, and you will come across times when you just can't really explain something, and unless you have that openness, you may just never get to the bottom of it, and that's very frustrating. So with all the stuff that's gone on, it's quite remarkable you got to the bottom of it. So it's a really interesting case.
Yeah.
May I ask you, is the farmer familiar with all aspects of the disease and its control? Sorry,
just say that again.
Is the farmer familiar with all aspects of the BVD infection and its control?
Now, yes. Initially, no. I think the initial understanding was if I vaccinate, I will get rid of BVD. That was his basic understanding. And it was only when I went into the PI, I think he thought that by tagging and testing was going to sort out any PIs that were coming through into the herd, and perhaps any PIs older than that point hadn't really been covered, or there was no definite way that we were going to pick them up until they got into the milking herd, which was why 748 took so long to find, because she was after the tagging and testing but took a long time to get to the milking herd.
I think our next episode will be with our farmer B.
Yeah.
So I'm checking the questions. So not a question, but a comment from my colleague. Yeah, she's saying thank you for being so persistent with the cases and the follow-up. And I'm looking at the question box. Yeah, I think there's a general question, if any of you can comment on this. When should a farm investigate for BVD? Maybe Becky, we start with you.
Anybody who doesn't know their status needs to find out their status, because if they are, if they don't have BVD, then they need to make sure that they have a strict isolation in place or biosecurity in place to stop it coming onto the farm, because its consequences can be so dramatic in quite a very short space of time as well.
Okay. Any comments from you, Nikki or Niels? Maybe I should unmute you.
I think with every health problem you look after BVD.
Okay.
Yeah, same as Becky said. You know, I think certainly with our case, if we hadn't been doing testing anyway, we wouldn't have picked things up early. So certainly picking things up early as well with routine screening of herds that, as I say, I think every breeding herd should be doing some screening. That's what we encourage, because you pick things up earlier, and as Becky said, you can protect those herds that really need protecting as well.
And any comment from your side, Volker?
Yeah, my question is, what is the environment of your herds? Are there many farmers, dairy farmers, that are going through this program of BVD control, or is it just are there only single farmers of doing that? Because the infectious pressure from neighboring farms, of course, is always there.
Is it a question to Becky or?
Well, both of them, to Nikki and Becky.
So we in Northamptonshire
in the UK.
So it's very different. So we're in Northamptonshire. We're mostly suckler herds. We have not a lot of dairy work. I think Becky might be quite different, and we're also not that cattle dense. So most people don't have a lot of cattle neighbours, which again I think is very different around the country. But certainly with a lot of encouragement, we have got, I say, a lot of our herds testing now, and certainly a lot of neighbours are testing, and people buying between herds are also starting to know who's testing. So it definitely has benefited the sort of general area to get everybody involved.
I would say most of our dairy herds, if they're not vaccinated, if they're not investigating on farm, they are certainly vaccinating. Most of them are. Most of our routine dairy herds. Our beef herds probably not quite as much, but we're definitely getting more uptake now than what we were a couple of years ago.
You say vaccinating, but I mean the full panel, looking for PIs and vaccination.
So looking for PIs, they're most of them, their milk buyers now want them to do BVD PCR bulk milk testing quarterly. Actually actively looking for young calves, PI hunting, unless they're tagging and testing on farm, which not many are. We don't do masses of antibody screening in dairy herds. We do more antibody screening in beef herds, where they wouldn't necessarily be doing having any vaccination protocol in place.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the questions. There's no any other question coming from the audience. By the way, we were around 50 people in this webinar. So I would like to ask the audience and also the panelists a question here. If you would like to hear more about educational sessions from us in the future, not only BVD, but all generally in cattle. So that would be appreciated to see if this is a successful session for the audience. And I would like to highlight our information resources once again. We have a blog all about BVD disease globally, and we have a Twitter account that you can be notified from our updates, and also these type of videos are available in our YouTube channel. So today I would like to thank Volker first, and then Nikki, Niels, and Becky and also Matt for backing up Becky's part. That was yeah, Becky, you had the privilege to be introduced by Matt, so that was definitely very nice. So thank you everyone for joining the call as well, so on the audience. And here I'm concluding our call, and I wish you a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.